It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10. Our top story. The Prime Minister and Chancellor make their big budget move, a change to the government's debt rules that could raise £50 billion.
If we carried on that path, it would be a path of decline. And I don't want that path for Britain. So we will measure debt differently.
Sir Keir Starmer is in Samoa and gives us his clearest tax rise hint yet as he narrows his definition of the working people he wants to protect.
OK, so for someone who works but gets their income from assets as well, such as shares of property, are they a working person?
Well, they wouldn't come within my definition.
And as the King prepares to open the Commonwealth Summit later tonight, the tough questions over British reparations for slavery, which the Prime Minister admits will be discussed. Also tonight, stealing a march on Britain's shoplifters. We speak to reformed serial offenders as official data shows a precipitous rise. President Putin and the rare public questions. After hosting a leaders' summit, he defends his war in Ukraine. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Good evening, thanks for joining us. When Liz Truss tried to convince the markets she could increase borrowing to help grow the economy, her time in Downing Street was cut short after just 49 days. Today, Rachel Reeves announced she will rewrite the debt rules in next week's budget to allow more borrowing. And so far, the markets seem to be on side. The Prime Minister is in the South Pacific this evening, but has said his government needed to act because the economy is broken. Well, the government's rules when it comes to spending and borrowing are being updated. Rachel Reeves told us that day-to-day spending will still be funded by government revenue rather than borrowing. But it's the rules around debt that will be redefined, changing the way it's measured when borrowing is planned. The result? An additional £50 billion of scope to borrow, provided it's funding investment in the economy. In a moment, we'll hear the Prime Minister's take on the budget, including his strongest hint yet over who could be hit. But first, our economics and business correspondent Paul Kelso reports from Washington.
The Chancellor glad-handing with her international peers in Washington at her first IMF meeting since taking office. But with a budget looming, there's no escape from domestic issues, and she chose the British Embassy, where she once worked, to reveal she will change crucial debt rules to borrow more to invest.
Under the plans that I've inherited from the previous Conservative government, a public sector net investment as a share of our economy was due to decline steeply during the course of this Parliament. And if we carried on that path, it would be a path of decline. And I don't want that path for Britain when there are so many opportunities in industries from life sciences to carbon capture and storage and clean energy to AI and technology, as well as the need to repair our crumbling schools and hospitals. So we will measure debt differently.
Borrowing to invest has the support of many economists gathered here, but for the UK, with debt levels the IMF already deem risky, there are perils.
There are some signs that markets are a little bit nervous, but to be honest, disentangling that from what is going on the other side of the Atlantic in the US and Donald Trump and the potential of a second Trump presidency, that's the difficult thing for financial markets to decipher.
Fiscal rules, in plain English, that means tax and spend, are entirely self-imposed, but they matter because the government uses them to reassure markets that their long-term plans are credible. Now, Rachel Reeves says her first rule, that day-to-day spending on the NHS and other public services is covered by taxes, will do that. But it is only 2 years since Liz Truss's mini-budget crashed Britain's reputation, and markets will now be watching to see if the Chancellor means it when she says she'll take tough decisions.
There we go, as if by magic, it presents it, and then...
Where those taxes fall has a bearing on businesses like this. IGUS make precision smart plastics for everything from airline seats to robotics, and the long wait for this budget and its likely content has not gone down well.
Business does not like uncertainty, and we just don't know at the moment how things are going to pan out over the next couple of weeks. So people are holding back.
The Chancellor does not deny there is pain to come.
Presumably one way you retain the confidence of markets and meet your first fiscal rule is to hit people in their pockets. You're going to have to tax them more and you're going to have to make spending cuts.
I was clear in the statement I made to the House of Commons in July that there will be difficult decisions in this budget around spending, welfare and taxation. But the precise details I will set out to the House of Commons next week. The worst thing that a Chancellor could do in the budget next week is not put Britain's public finances and Britain's public services on a sustainable path. I'm determined to do that. I will be a responsible Chancellor.
Rachel Reeves chose a global stage to signal this major change, but the verdict will come at home, starting next week. Paul Kelso, Sky News in Washington.
Well, the Chancellor may have been focusing today on government borrowing, but Sir Keir Starmer talked to us tonight about who he could tax. After much talk of protecting what they've called working people, he clarified that to him, they don't just work, but can't easily write a cheque, in his words, to get out of difficulties. And they don't include those with income from shares or property. The Prime Minister isn't just facing questions over Britain's spending on itself. Ahead of the Commonwealth summit, he said there would be conversations about whether countries like Britain should pay reparations for slavery. Our political editor Beth Rigby's interview with Keir Starmer started with her asking if he is prepared to agree to talk.
There are 55 Commonwealth countries here represented. It's a meeting that takes place every other year, and there's a lot of conversation going on. Reparations is one of the conversations, of course, but there are conversations about resilience and climate, because for many countries, particularly some of the island countries, that's a very real threat.
They want to put it into the communique. Are you prepared to do that?
We're also talking about trade. The combined GDP of the countries represented here is the best part of $20 trillion. On the question of reparations, obviously it's very important for me to say and to recognise that the slave trade and practice was abhorrent, and that is history. We can't change our history, and we should start from that place. But the question now at this conference is, do we want to focus more on the challenges now, which to my mind are resilience and the climate challenge, and the opportunity of trade, or look backwards? And I say we should look forward.
Okay.
But look, that's there's a conversation going on here, quite right too.
Your career as a lawyer and your pitch as a politician has always been about justice and doing the right thing. Don't you think that approach, if the other Commonwealth leaders want to put it in the communique, put it on the table, is a bit arrogant and dismissive to say, I don't want to talk about it?
Well, first thing I'd say is there are 55 countries represented here. There is no one view amongst all 55. There are many different and varied views, and you'd expect that. There are 55 delegations. I've had quite a number of discussions since I've been here. Actually more about trade and opportunities, more about resilience and change. Because for many countries...
I've got to move on. Are you relaxed if it's in the communique, though, or do you not want it in the communique? Because it looks like it's going in the communique, some sort of discussion about it.
Well, let's see. The communique is being discussed at the moment. We'll see what it contains in due course. But I'm just clear in my mind that, yes, we must acknowledge history and absolutely recognise the abhorrence of the slave trade. And that's very important. But at the same time, we have to answer the question, which is being put to me, which is, how can you help us with resilience now? Because we've got, a flood problem that's measured in years, not decades, and we need to deal with it.
Because I haven't got long. In August, in the Downing Street Garden, you talked about painful choices coming in the budget. It was a hint of tax rises on the way. You didn't say it out loud. Will you level with us now? Are taxes going to be going up?
The budget will be set out by the Chancellor on the 30th.
The principle of it.
But what I was talking about when I was speaking at Downing Street, and what I've said ever since, is this. We've inherited a very bad situation here. The economy is broken, and we've discovered there's a £22 billion black hole. My approach, the Chancellor's approach, is to acknowledge that problem, run towards it and fix it.
Yes,
so that we can fix the foundations.
Are taxes going up beyond what you said in the manifesto?
We will then rebuild the country.
Are taxes going up?
That will be set out in the manifesto.
The principle of it?
It'll be set out in the manifesto.
Well, you set it out in the manifesto, taxes
I'm sorry, it'll be set out in the budget on Wednesday.
Is that the painful choice, that taxes will be going up? I'm not asking you to set out what they are, but just the principle of it.
Well, the principle we put in place is that there's a £22 billion black hole, and we've got to
So taxes are going up?
Well, we're also clear that we're not returning to austerity.
People will be watching this, and then when you put taxes up, and you won't say in principle, look, they're going to have to go up and you'll get more detail.
I appreciate that, but
cool.
I appreciate that. But you know, and I know that no government before a budget sets out what's going to be in the budget.
I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you about the principle. You said to me in Grimsby, all our plans are fully funded, fully costed, fully funded. We do not raise taxes on working people. No rises for income tax, national insurance, for VAT. That's still the case, but are other taxes going up?
I said that to you in Grimsby. I think I said it to you everywhere we met in the entire campaign.
Are other taxes
going up? And I'll absolutely
up?
repeat that. For working people, we made an absolute commitment that their income tax wouldn't go up, their national insurance wouldn't go up, their VAT wouldn't go up. I said that in the campaign. We're going to keep to those promises.
But should we expect taxes more broadly to go up?
We're going to have to make difficult decisions in this budget. I'm not going to preempt the budget.
That's a yes.
You know that.
Okay.
Look, but what we are going to do, it's really important that we fix the foundations. We've got to clear up this mess once and for all. And then on that, we build a better Britain. And that we will set out, which is measured in people feeling better off. The NHS, not just back on its feet, but actually fit for the future. And public services working in the way that people are entitled to see from their public services.
Prime Minister, are you a working person?
Well, I would define a working person as somebody goes out and earns their living, usually paid in a sort of monthly cheque. But I think that's obviously very broad. So let me be clear. What I mean, or if you like, who I have in my mind's eye when I make decisions as Prime Minister, are the sorts of working people who go out, work hard, and maybe save a bit of money, but don't have the wherewithal to write a cheque to get out of difficulties if they and their family get into difficulties. That's who I have in my mind. People who've got that anxiety, if you like, in the bottom of their stomach, that says, we're doing all right, but should something happen to me and my family, I haven't actually got the wherewithal to get out of that problem. So that's who I have mostly in mind.
The definition is very broad. Who isn't a working person? Who is a person for whom you think taxes should go up?
Well, it is broad, I accept that. But when
broad?
No, but when I tell you who's in my mind's eye, which is, and I think everybody watching this will know, whether they're in this category, because you carry in that situation a sort of knot in the bottom of the stomach, which is, if push comes to shove and something happens to me and my family, I can't just get a chequebook out, even though I've maybe got a bit of saving. But they're the people that in a way, I came into politics to try and make sure that they had secure jobs, didn't have the anxiety of public services not working, and felt genuinely better off with better opportunities. That's what I have in my mind's eye.
Okay, so for someone who works but gets their income from assets as well, such as shares of property, are they a working person?
Well, they wouldn't come within my definition.
So their taxes could go up?
Yeah, I mean, you can probably give me any number of examples. No, you're tagging a second question to the first, which is you're asking me for a definition of who's a working person, and then you're making assumptions about what the tax might be in relation to.
The point is, we're running out of time, but I could go through fuel duty. If you're driving a van,
you could.
You're a working person and you might put fuel duty up.
You could go through that exercise, or you could, ensure that people hear from me who I have in my mind's eye. People watching this will know whether they're in that group or not. Those people who work hard, are anxious about whether they can make ends meet, and know that should something happen to them and their family, they can't write a chequebook to get out of the problem. I'm really concerned about them, and the decisions I make are, because politics for me is about who do you have in your mind's eye when you make your decisions. I'm not ideological. I have those people in my mind's eye. The reason it matters, Prime Minister, and the reason I'm pressing you on whether it's people with shares, if it's fuel duty that might go up and hit people that drive vans or cars to work, or freezing council tax, bans and council tax going up potentially, the reason it matters, the reason I'm pressing you, is because you say trust in politics is broken, and you promised 4 months ago for working people taxes not going up. And there will be loads of working people out there that are going to be hit by tax rises and might think that you do one thing or say one thing and do another. Well, I made clear promises in the election campaign, and I intend to keep those promises. So let me be very clear about that. In relation to the other measures that may or may not be in the budget, as you know, they will be set out in full when the budget is unveiled by the Chancellor, and no government ever says in advance, for very obvious reasons, what's in the budget. It's very close now, so we will know the full details of it. What I can say is the principles that we're operating to are We've got a problem here caused by the last government. We're going to fix it, and we're going to rebuild our country. And we've already started down that track. We got £63 billion worth of investment in just about 10 days ago. That is investment that will be measured in jobs across the country.
Prime Minister, I've got one final question, if you'll allow me. The Trump team has filed a complaint to the authorities in the US accusing the Labour Party of election interference. You are clear the Labour Party hasn't broken any of the rules. Are you annoyed that the possible future president and his staff are igniting a spat with you without basis?
Look, I think we should put this in perspective. I've met President Trump just a few weeks ago in New York. We had dinner together for 2 hours or so. He made a considerable effort to get to that dinner, for which I was very grateful. We both wanted to make sure that we got to know each other, created a good relationship. We both understand that the special relationship between the UK and the US was forged in difficult circumstances historically, but matters as much today. And of course, I will work with whoever the president is that's elected by the American people in just a few days' time.
So you're
the
relaxed.
fact that a few Labour volunteers went in this election, as they've done in every election, as party activists have done from all different political parties in pretty well every election that's gone on year after year after year, that needs to be put in its proper perspective.
So you're not going to even bother to raise it with him or his team? You're relaxed about it?
No, I've got a good relationship with President Trump. And I think the importance of the relationship between our two countries is very, very significant, and I will work with whoever's elected in by the American people.
OK, Prime Minister, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Beth is still in Samoa for us this evening. Beth, that question and answer on who Keir Starmer counts as a working person was very revealing, not least because he thinks people still write cheques. I'm not sure many people do, but also who may be hit hardest by the budget next week.
Yeah, that was quite revealing. I mean, look, this is a Prime Minister that in the run-up to the general election just kept using this phrase, working people, to try and catch all sorts of voters, maybe that didn't trust Labour on the economy, were nervous about tax rises, to try and reassure them that taxes wouldn't be going up. But the reality is next week we have a government which, according to Treasury sources tell me, have a £40 billion gap in the public finances to fill. And how do they fill it? It has to come from tax rises or spending cuts in some form or another. So who's going to be hit by tax rises? And I think we actually got something out of the Prime Minister there, because as he defined working people, and I said to him quite clearly, in your mind, is that someone that owns assets or shares? He said they wouldn't be in my definition, and that gives us a hint that there could be possible tax rises, people that own assets or shares, capital gains. There has been talk that there could be possible tax rises there. And he did acknowledge it was a broad definition, and he did say there he wanted to narrow it down, and he talked about in his mind's eye that working people were people that took a salary at the end of the month, that maybe had some earnings, but also had a knot in their stomach, as he described it, you know, when they worried about another big bill coming in. And it gives you a sense of perhaps wealthier people that might be workers, but also own assets in different ways, might be having some tax rises. I can't tell you because we'll have to wait till next week, but certainly that was the impression he left, and it was the most revelatory for me, at least, as to who he defined as working people. Theresa May used to call them the just about managing, the jams, and it seemed to me that that is where he's defining it. And he has said consistently through his political career, when he was in opposition as well, about people with the broader shoulders bearing the burden. I think we got some hints there about what might be coming down the line next week.
Beth, let's talk about why you're in the South Pacific. It's for the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting as well, which is getting underway. And the Prime Minister has admitted that thorny issue of reparations for slavery is at least one of the conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. And coming over, the Prime Minister was very clear that he didn't want to reopen discussions on this, that he didn't want it to be on the agenda. It's not officially on the agenda here. And that he wanted to look forwards, as he would put it, not backwards. But there are a number of leaders here there are 56 different nations gathered that have a different view of that. And as I understand it, a number of leaders are going to get some sort of wording into the communique at the end of this. This is the agreement that they leaders come and reach about, you know, what they've agreed at this summit, where there will be some sort of, quote, meaningful discussion or about exploring the idea of some sort of reparation around the transatlantic slave trade. Now, I asked the Prime Minister about that again, and he's really not shifting position. He said it was important to recognise that the slave trade is abhorrent, and he said that there are a number of different leaders here with different views. He, by implication, has a different view about reopening this discussion. And he said that the leaders he was talking to were more interested in talking about trade and looking into the future. That is simply not the reality here. There are a number of Commonwealth leaders that see historic grievances as something that hits them and touches them in present day, and they want it on the table. And whatever the Prime Minister may wish, I think coming out of this, this will be a live issue about reparations, not least because at this summit tomorrow, the leaders will pick the next Secretary General of the Commonwealth, and all three candidates have made historic reparations part of their agenda. So whether the Prime Minister wants it or not, it will be on the agenda here, and I'm sure it will be discussed more in the coming 24 hours.
Beth in Samoa for us this evening. Thank you very much indeed. One former shoplifter has told Sky News he stole nearly £3 million worth of goods before he reformed. Shoplifting is now forming an increasingly large part of the nation's crime statistics, as we discovered today. Despite public perception, overall crime rates have been going down for the last 3 decades, albeit with an uptick in the year up to June this year. When you break that down and look at just theft, that is also on the rise, as police recorded 1.8 million offences, a 3% increase over the last year. That was driven by a really steep rise in shoplifting, with more than 460,000 cases reported. That represents a 29% year-on-year rise, the highest it's been since current police recording began back in 2003. Our chief North of England correspondent, Greg Milam, spoke to reformed shoplifters over why that might be.
Two men walk into a co-op in Warrington. This is the story of the people behind Britain's shoplifting epidemic. They know what they're looking for and help themselves before heading for the exit. What happens then would almost be comical if this wasn't criminal. In 5 months, often together, Paul Morris shoplifted 36 times, Chad Feeney 18, before they were caught and jailed.
Years and years ago, when, you know, if you stole £100 worth of something, you could get 50, 60 quid for it. Now you're not even going to get 20 quid.
But this is the voice we rarely hear in all the talk about shoplifting. Police say Chris Downs has been shoplifting for 2 decades. Here's his mugshot. He's currently banned from a whole town centre. What do you feel about why you did it?
Why I did it? Did it because of a drug problem, Greg, to be honest with you. And no option. And I know it's wrong, but it was the least. It wasn't hurting any individual. I didn't see it as, you know, you'd be surprised who shoplifts. And being a shoplifter, you notice a little old lady with a trolley. She's got it lined with foil inside and putting the bottles of whiskey and whatever in the trolley.
Chris says he'd like to never shoplift again, and it is possible to get out of it.
We would park around the back with the car park, yeah, and then we'd come and hit the whole high street.
Shoplifting was a way of life for Cullen, regularly captured on security cameras, several times sent to prison. Now reformed, he helps others find a way out.
I stole millions. You know, when the certain shopping chain caught me and they valued it all up, they said I stole 2.8 million. And that was just one shopping chain. Of course, I never made millions. That's the retail price. Shoplifting to me was an addiction in itself. It was a buzz, and I loved it. And even when I kicked my addiction, it was very hard not to think about it.
So what is the answer?
Prison didn't work for me. It just made me a better criminal and made me more comfortable going to prison. You know, I never changed through prison. I changed through rehabilitation.
What he's doing now, he says, is his way of giving back. But every year there are hundreds of thousands of thefts costing millions of pounds, and the numbers are going up. And clearly plenty who see shoplifting as easy money. Greg Milam, Sky News.
To the US now, and Donald Trump already stands a significant chance, of course, of winning the election in less than a fortnight's time. But in battleground states, his campaign is preparing to try to lock in any victory or challenge any close loss. In the state of Georgia, which was one of the tightest back in 2020, we spoke to one woman who's a Republican and who sits on the state's electoral board. She's told us she's not afraid to rock the boat. Our US correspondent James Matthews reports now from Atlanta.
We are going to fly it like we stole it, try to get up as much time as we can.
To go to the heart of election trauma is to go to Georgia.
Next stop is ATL West parking.
It's the state that gave us the interference case, complete with Trump phone call.
I just want to find 11,780 votes. Fellas, I need 11,000 votes. Give me a break.
And then it gave us the Trump mugshot and the prosecution for election fraud, currently paused. This year's vote was in the courts, long before it reached the polling stations. Legal challenges to the election process in Georgia and across America number more than 90. Republicans talk of restructuring a flawed system. Democrats call it a Trump effort to sow mistrust and chaos.
There are people like me who are not afraid to rock the boat.
Donald Trump calls Janelle King a pit bull for victory. She's on the Georgia State Election Board, which oversees voting. As a Republican, she's been involved in legal challenges that are judged throughout as illegal, unconstitutional and invalid. I suppose there are those who wouldn't share that view, that pit bull for victory. They would say pit bull for delay, disruption in the election process. What would you say to that?
Well, I would say that that's all hypothetical, just like his statement is. I mean, there's nothing that would indicate that will happen.
They are cheaters. That's the way they do.
That's true. They're professional thieves.
Cheating is the charge, already from Donald Trump.
Are from early voting.
If Trump is laying the ground for legal challenge, the man who once took his call asking for votes,
James Matthews from Sky News,
is asking for trust.
Are Donald Trump's comments helpful?
Well, it doesn't faze me. I just continue to put my head down, do my job. And I think if people want to find out what's really going on, just ask Brad.
Republicans are making preparations for a lengthy legal battle in the wake of the election. Democrats, too, are wargaming likely scenarios, starting with Donald Trump claiming victory prematurely on election night. With one advocate for voters' rights, we talked uncertainty and the fear of it.
What bothers me more is there being any iota of uncertainty in the mind of eligible voters as to whether or not they're allowed to vote. And that just should not be permitted to happen.
It is concern for the coming election informed by the violence of the one just passed. In American politics, looking forward is difficult without looking back. James Matthews, Sky News, in Atlanta, Georgia.
Just a quick reminder that we will, of course, have full rolling coverage of the US election on the 5th of November and through the night as the results come in. The team includes my colleagues Mark Austin and Yalda Hakim, and they're joined by our correspondent Mark Stone and also Lewis Goodall. The chance of limiting global warming to 1.5 Celsius is virtually zero on current trends. That's according to the UN's environment body. This year's emissions gap report has found that emissions of greenhouse gases in 2023 were the highest on record, with the planet on course for a potentially catastrophic 3.1 Celsius of warming this century if changes aren't made compared to pre-industrial times. Lucy Letby has been told she cannot challenge her conviction for the attempted murder of a baby girl. She was found guilty in July of trying to kill a newborn known as Child K. The 34-year-old is already serving 14 whole life orders for the murders of 7 babies and the attempted murders of 6 other infants in Chester. A prosecutor in Los Angeles has recommended the resentencing of the Menendez brothers, who were convicted in 1989 for the murder of their parents. The case has gained interest in recent months after Netflix released a documentary of the case. The brothers have spent 34 years in prison, but they could now be eligible for parole immediately. President Putin embarked on a rare public news conference today, answering questions from journalists, including those from the West. He was cryptic when asked about North Korean troops potentially being deployed to fight in Ukraine, but was clear when he said any peace deal would need to reflect the realities on the ground. Sky's Moscow correspondent Ivor Bennett saw him speak in the Russian city of Kazan.
These are the images that are making the West so concerned. Proof the US claims that North Korean troops are in Russia receiving training. They fear they'll join the fight against Ukraine. Kiev believes they already have in Russia's Kursk region to repel their incursion. 600 miles away in the city of Kazan, Vladimir Putin neither confirmed nor denied the reports, only citing an agreement with Pyongyang to help each other repel external aggression.
We've never doubted that the North Korean leadership takes our agreement seriously. But what we do and how we do things is our business within the framework of this article.
The Kremlin leader's just finished hosting the BRICS summit for emerging economies, where he's enjoyed holding court. Representatives from more than 30 countries were here. At one point, he even called for an end to the violence in the Middle East. But what about Ukraine? Putin says that's different. Apparently, NATO's at fault.
We told them not to do it. NATO expansion. But no, they did it anyway. Is this fair? There is no justice here. We want to change the situation, and we will achieve this.
Press conferences like this have been few and far between since the start of the war, with Vladimir Putin happy to take questions from members of the foreign media. And it's a sign of his confidence right now. He believes that as a result of this summit, the global majority is on his side. But not everyone here has been supportive, like the UN's Secretary General, who called for an end to the war.
We need peace in Ukraine, a just peace in line with UN Charter, international law and General Assembly resolutions.
For Vladimir Putin, though, this has been something to celebrate, seemingly making more friends than foes. Ivor Bennett, Sky News, Kazan.
Just a reminder that in the next hour, the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting will get underway in Samoa. We'll bring you the King's opening remarks, but that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's papers in the press preview. Tonight, I'm joined by Alison Morris, columnist for the Belfast Telegraph, and Henry Hill, deputy editor for Conservative Home. Among the stories we'll be talking about, this story on the front page of the Mail. Its headline, Labour's budget ploy will punish mortgage holders. We'll be right back.
I say, bring it on.
With America divided and tensions running high, get ready for an election like no other.
Join our teams as we follow the campaign trail as America decides.
We will win, win, win.
Get closer to the action this US election with full reaction and analysis.
Sky News, the full story first.
Good evening. You're watching the press preview. A first look at what is on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with Alison Morris, columnist for the Belfast Telegraph, and Henry Hill, deputy editor of Conservative Home. They'll be with me from now until just before midnight. So let's see what is on some of those front pages. And the Financial Times leads on the news that Rachel Reeves has confirmed she will change the UK's fiscal rules in her upcoming budget. The Daily Telegraph also leads on the budget, adding that the Chancellor has been warned that interest rates will remain higher for longer if she rewrites the country's debt rules. The budget also features on the front page of the Daily Mail. Their headline, Labour's budget ploy will punish mortgage holders. The story also features on the Times front page as well. In other news, The Guardian says that the Prime Minister has opened the door to non-financial reparations for Britain's role in the transatlantic slave trade as he came under pressure during the Commonwealth summit in Samoa. The Eye has revealed that mental health therapists who've been banned for serious misconduct, including sex with patients, are still working in the profession. The Metro reports that shoplifting has reached a record high, with it costing stores £1.8 billion in 1 year. Daily Express says that online fraudsters have been ripping off the Royal British Legion's annual appeal by selling thousands of pounds worth of fake poppies to the public. Help make Florrie's dream come true. The Daily Mirror urges its readers to help Pride of Britain winner Florrie Bark raise £1 million for her children's cancer charity. And mistaken for a rock god, the Daily Star leads on the story that an Indian restaurant has gone viral for mistaking this man on the front page for Paul Weller ahead of the musician's show in Wolverhampton and gave him a free meal to boot. A reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out those front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us talk about them. And I'm joined tonight by Alison Morris and Henry Hill. It's good to see you both. And as much as I'm tickled by that Paul Weller story, we'll come back to that one a bit later on. But Henry, let's start with the front page of the Financial Times, which spells out in a bit more detail this change to the fiscal rules that Rachel Reeves has said she's going to do.
Yeah, so essentially the Chancellor has said that in order to free up money essentially for capital budgets, which means revenue expenses are day-to-day, like wages and so on. Capital stuff is investment in new buildings, new machinery and that kind of thing. So she's changing the way that the UK's borrowing fiscal rules work to allow for borrowing for capital projects, but not for revenue expenditure. And her plan is to keep revenue expenses in line with tax receipts over the course of the 5-year Parliament. Now, this is, in the abstract, not a bad policy. It probably should have been done a very long time ago because it's a lot easier to sell the markets on we're borrowing for this clear project that has a defined cost and will pay off than it is we're going to borrow for a wage cost that's a wage bill that's only ever going to go up. The question is, how are the markets going to respond to it? Because it is nonetheless an increase in government borrowing. It comes only a few months after an election in which Labour insisted in fairly strong terms they weren't going to need to do any of this. And so I think the worry on the side of the markets will be, OK, this is the first chink in the wall, right? What happens when the government comes under continued pressure over the next few years? Ministers are really unhappy about having to find cuts.
The government would say, of course, they got into office and suddenly found a much bigger black hole than they were expecting in the budget of whatever, 22 billion, 40 billion, who knows where it could end up. This also features, Alison, on the front page of the Mail. In fact, several of the papers are tying this change to the fiscal rules to how it could potentially hit people in their pockets, and the Mail is talking about mortgage borrowers.
Yeah, and look, we can talk about what effect this has on the bonds market and all that wider financial implications, but what do people really want to know? What will this do to my mortgage? What will it do to my spending? How will it hit my purse? You know, those domestic economics is what's really... And most of us, I think, are still feeling the impact of Liz Truss's mini-budget, which did terrible things to my mortgage, I have to say.
Terrible things to Liz Truss as well.
And I am not prepared or able to take another hit. So that's what people are going to be watching. Obviously, this is the government's first budget. The impact of this, and I suppose the impact of it on the markets, really is, I think it's crucial in terms of Keir Starmer has had a very rocky start, let's face it. Usually governments like to have the first and last year of their term to be nice and positive, and they keep all the nasty stuff for in around the middle when there's not an election looming. And the fact that we're getting off to a very bad start, which heard there's a £40 billion gap in public expenditure. He's saying this is not a return to austerity, but it's very difficult to see how we're not going to have to see austerity-type measures in order to try and bridge that gap.
I guess, Henry, the difference with Liz Truss is she also made tax cuts at the same time, and the markets didn't like that. So far, we hear the markets are responding fairly well to the way the Chancellor's rolled the pitch today. We'll find out next week when the actual budget comes out as well, of course. But when it comes to investing in big projects, like you said, like the big station that's being rebuilt in Belfast you were telling us about, Alison, before, the markets like that kind of thing, and so do big institutions like the IMF.
They do. The reason that we're really bad at it in this country is that when you're a politician and your back is against the wall and you need to find savings, it is always politically easier to find savings from capital budgets than revenue expenses, right? Because generally speaking, they're less tangible, right? If you're going and saying, oh, OK, we're going to cut the pension, we're going to cut welfare, we're going to cut any of those big entitlements, there's an immediate political backlash. Whereas if you just endlessly delay capital projects, you do eventually notice, because nothing works anymore, right?
Like HS2 at the moment, right?
The railways are overcrowded, the sewage system is decades out of date, and all the rest of it. But the year to year, people don't notice, and so we have historically been incredibly bad at making capital investment. And if the result of this rule is that we manage to actually channel more money into capital investment, that will be a really good thing. I think the challenge after this will be making sure that that money is spent effectively and that we don't end up seeing what's often happened, which is basically the Treasury, in order to keep everything within its kind of 5-year windows, sort of absolutely salami slicing and mangling projects into oblivion and costs ending up several times higher than they were initially projected. So there's lots of other problems to overcome to spend capital budgets effectively, but freeing up money to do it, so long as the markets will bear it, is not a bad idea. The challenge is the ideal time to do this would have been during a very long period of zero interest rates, which we had for a long time. Doing it now, when government debt repayments are already larger than several government departments, including education, annual spend on education is less than we spend on servicing debt. Anything that risks increasing that will put more pressure on government finances.
She always knew there was going to be a balancing act to be had here in her first budget, of course. Let's move on to the Daily Telegraph, because their headline describes this as a £50 billion debt fiddle. Henry first. I mean, from a Conservative point of view, do you think it is a fiddle?
So it is. It's a fiddle in as much as
a fiddle, a fudge. I mean, call it what you like.
So it is. I mean, I've said before. I think it's a perfect. I think that having different rules for capital borrowing is perfectly sensible. It is a fiddle in as much as Labour went and fought the election saying that, they absolutely weren't going to need to change any of the rules and that they would govern within the fiscal rules. And so they have now said that they won't. But whether or not the voters think it counts as a fiddle, which is what actually matters, right, will depend on whether or not this feeds through into mortgage rates, inflation, the things that affect them on a day-to-day basis. Because let's face it, very few voters actually go to the polls and are like, well, bond yields are down, exactly. Right? Yeah. So if she can square this with the market and it works, that's fine. But obviously, I think the Conservatives, they dug a lot of elephant traps for Labour over the last 2 years. Jeremy Hunt in particular, and Jeremy Hunt, because of the length of the Tory leadership contest, is going to be responding to the budget. Jeremy Hunt rolled £20 billion worth of unfunded capital spending cuts into this 25-6 fiscal year. Yes. He bounced Labour into ruling out the NI increases, so he'll be watching all of this and going for all it's worth.
Fiscal drag as well, Jeremy Hunt brought in that we think Labour are going to extend as well, of course. Alison, the thing is, when it comes to what Rachel Reeves is doing, like you say, it's how it hits people in the pocket. They won't necessarily mind if it's a fiddle or not, if they feel the benefit.
No, exactly. And, I mean, the Daily Telegraph saying she's unrepentant in terms of these changes and the changes to how government borrowing and spending will take place. And the reason why she's saying if they continue on this road to decline, what you said at the start, people don't actually notice when you're not investing in capital projects for a time, and then they do start noticing, because you can't build housing if you don't update your sewage system. You can't, you know, all of these things all have a knock-on effect on each other, and an investment, and foreign investment as well, isn't one going to come into a country which is on eternal decline. So she said there's guardrails in place to protect this, that this is not going to be one of the, you know, a budget like the Liz Truss budget where everything's going to go into a complete and utter downfall. But we don't know, because we don't know until we see the impact of it, because it's unusual. Some might say it's innovative. You know, she's looking at new ways to try and deal with the massive problems that Labour have inherited. But how will that work out? Well, you know, I think it's just going to have to let it land and see.
Innovative against the ambiguity of the manifesto, as you pointed out there, Henry. You know, my colleague Beth Rigby spoke to the Prime Minister in Samoa this evening, and he described a working person as someone who can't whip out the chequebook at the end of the month and pay, you know, and get themselves out of a hole. Although I don't know, do you either use chequebooks anymore? I
was going to say, who on earth does?
I don't even know if I've got a chequebook anymore. Yeah. Who knows?
I used to like getting paid by a cheque. You felt like you had something in your hand,
Something
but it's
physical.
been a long time, yes, from I've actually even seen a cheque.
You can't put a bank transfer in a birthday card, can you?
You can't.
Good. OK, well, listen, coming up on the papers, we'll be discussing this story on the front of tomorrow's Guardian. Its headline, Number 10 holds back ban on outdoor smoking. We'll be right back.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
Prime Minister Modi is the most popular politician in the country. He is expected to win his third term in these elections.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party, a promise fulfilled.
I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
He paid over $50,000 to traffickers to get him to America. Instead, he was kidnapped, tied up, and threatened by smugglers. A commando from the state force walks me through to a Mai Tai village on the front line.
Firing the civilian and they're burning our house.
We cross to the opposite side, held by the cookies.
When they fire, we have to retaliate.
Sky News, get the full story first. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration.
The enthusiasm is palpable. The young desire change.
These elections are a pivotal moment for the country's economic and political history.
The concern here is that the public healthcare system is inadequate.
In a prayer, she's asking God to help understand what happened. I cannot carry on. God, help me. He says his world has crashed. Like him, there are scores of families searching for their loved ones.
Too often have families endured such tragedies for the negligence not only by the administration, but also by spiritual people in this country. Free wherever you get your news. Even though it has few seats in Parliament, Kashmir is symbolic and very significant. It's often been called a nuclear flashpoint.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page
and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Welcome back. You're watching the press preview here on Sky News. Still with me, Alison Morris and Henry Hill. Let's get straight back to the front pages and let's have a look at The Guardian, because in the break we were just discussing this smoking ban and the effect of the original ban on smoking on places like pubs. But it looks, Henry, that number 10 is holding back a ban on outdoor smoking, according to The Guardian.
Yeah, so the tobacco and vapes bill, which is a quite sort of wide-ranging bill that has a whole package of measures, including the infamous sort of raising age policy, also is going to include a ban on smoking in outdoor areas, in pub gardens and club smoking areas and so on. And the government has apparently, Downing Street has nixed this on the understandable reason that there is apparently no compelling evidence base, because obviously indoor smoking, it was about second-hand smoke, right? If you're in an enclosed space, especially one with bad ventilation, you are effectively being subjected to tobacco smoke in quite a concentrated way. There's absolutely no evidence that that's true if you're outside. So the harm to others argument was not there. And therefore, it was much harder for the advocates of this policy to push back on the counter-arguments from the hospitality sector, because, you know, nightclubs were saying it's one thing to make people go and have a smoking area, that's fine. Every single nightclub has a smoking area. If you just ban that as well, suddenly you've got people having to go literally in and out of the club the whole time, which makes it much harder to control for drugs and weapons and so on. Rural pubs were saying, the pub industry has taken a real squeeze over the last 10, 15 years. It would be much even harder to get people there. And so it looks as if they're nixing this policy. The remarkable thing is that it was ever briefed for the bill in the first place.
Who's a smoker on this discussion this evening? You smoke?
Oh, no,
socially.
I'm not. And never,
socially.
Yeah.
Socially. There's no such thing as social
Yes, there is. Yes, there absolutely is.
Antisocial habits.
That is absolutely not true. The smoking area is the most social bit of a club.
You'll still be able to go outside for the time being.
Yes, well, it was... When this was first announced, it was actually amusing how angry it made people. Even people who didn't smoke seemed to be absolutely furious about the thought of this happening. And, you know, so much was invested into beer gardens after the smoking ban, and then during COVID as well. Businesses ploughed massive amounts of money into, you know, updating their beer gardens and making them nice places to sit. And I think that this was probably going to be a hit too much. It really wasn't popular. As you said, there's no evidence for it. I don't smoke. I don't particularly like to be around a load of smoke. But, I mean, I do like sitting outside. I live in Ireland. We don't really get we're not beer garden weather. Like, it's, you know, it's not the Mediterranean. But when there's a break in the rain, yes, I do like sitting outside. And I do think that people will accept bans if they know that there's a reason and it's good for their health and good for their family's health, but we're just not prepared, I think, to accept this at all.
Well, if you go to the pub, you'd like to know the pub is there, because the hospitality industry has been on its knees, really, well, since the original smoking ban to a degree, and post-pandemic as well.
I'm keeping at least 3 or 4 bar staff going.
Yeah, well, this is
single-handedly by myself.
Is it. And by the way, have you had a pint recently? It's so expensive. Let's go back to the front page of the FT, Alison, because look, they focus on the US election as well. Very briefly, Trump is taking a slender lead over Harris on who US voters trust with the economy, and that seems to be the thing that will give him some impetus. His record on the economy last time.
He is, and I think that Harris is struggling right now in the polls. She did very well initially when she was announced as the candidate, and then it seems to sort of have stagnated. And a lot of people are saying it's the McDonald's factor. You know, Trump has come up with all these gimmicks that he's using to get himself, because we know that's what he's good at. He's good showman, he markets himself, and he's come up with all of these gimmicks that he is taking most of the headlines as she is trying to talk about policy and foreign policy and spending, and he's serving fries through a hole in a driveway. But he is grabbing the headlines, and I think that the American public, then you can see that in some of these polls, and she's struggling. I think we maybe see, you know, her team trying to come up with new ways to try and get her into the headlines as we go forward. American voters are very fickle.
Yes.
I've noticed, you know, they will change very quickly.
They change right up to the last minute in a couple of weeks' time. He does one day at McDonald's. I did 9 months when I was 17. Got no stars, but I really lived real life.
And nobody wanted you to run for president after that?
Look, it's not too late. Not American. Perhaps for the better. Good stuff. Thank you very much indeed. Let's take a quick look at the weather now. And we are entering an unsettled few days. so not great for pub gardens, but the southeast does look mostly dry. There'll be a mild, windy start tomorrow with locally heavy rain from the north of Ireland and southwest Scotland down to central southern England, and showers in the far southwest. Northern and eastern Britain look rather murky. The region from the north of Ireland to central southern England will stay mostly cloudy with outbreaks of rain tomorrow morning. Some heavy, but northwest England and southwest Scotland will dry up with sunny spells developing. Coming up next on Sky News, the Chancellor is accused of fiddling the rules as she unveils plans to borrow billions.
Day of this conflict. They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Why only in America? People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.